happy Monday. So we are here again for some reading fun. This week is all going to be about Earth Day because Earth Day is Wednesday. So we're going to read some books and do some things that all have to do with Earth Day. So our first book, we're going to be talking, it's called The Curious Garden is what we're going to read this week. It is a great story, so we're going to learn all about it. And what we're going to talk about this week is inferring. We're also going to talk about problem and solution with another book, and then just an I wonder with a different book. So this is Curious Garden. So infer means that we use background knowledge, we use what we know to figure out what the characters are thinking, what they're doing, what happened right before they did something, or what would happen if they did something a little bit different using what we know. So for today, we're going to be reading this book called The Curious Garden. And in your seesaw, you're going to have this assignment. It says infer it. So the question is, what would happen if Liam, which is one of the characters, saw the garden and then turned and walked back down the stairs? I wonder what that means for us today. So as we're reading, I want you to think about that question, but then we're going to answer it in our seesaw assignment today. So, The Curious Garden. So here we go. By Peter Brown. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. However, there was one boy who loved being outside. Even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairway leading up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working ages ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last thing he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. So what were some of the things that we learned last week that we know that plants need, that these plants needed? Yeah, we need water, space, sun, right? Waters are pretty important. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. So it looks like he sang to them. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless, and it wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks, and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. So the town's looking nice and colorful. So there he is. And there's some more. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over the railway. Winter had taken a toll on the garden, but thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway, and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. So we have a stop sign and a fire hydrant. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardeners. So he unconsciously recruited some help. Look at all these plants. The city looks lovely now. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed, but of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. And there, check out his city. So take a look. We can explore or compare this picture with the very first picture of the city. How is it different? So now he has lots of color. And he was able to recruit some help because they liked to see how they loved seeing what he was doing for the city. So, if he had not walked up those stairs, what might have happened? So that's what you're going to infer about in today's seesaw activity. So think about that before you start writing. Make sure that it is nice, complete sentences, and make sure that you're working hard. So what would happen if Liam saw the garden and then turned and walked back down the stairs? So what might have happened to the city knowing what we know now? Okay? All right, so have a great time writing. Can't wait to read about them.